For thousands of years, the story of the Garden of Eden has been handed down as a myth, a parable, or a literal account of humanity's first fall. In Sunday schools and sacred texts, it is presented as the origin point of sin, shame, and separation from God. But what if everything we've been told about Eden has been reversed, distorted, or hidden beneath layers of dogma? What if the garden was never meant to be lost, because it was never outside of us to begin with? This is not just a story about two people and a serpent. It's the coded memory of the human soul, buried deep within your consciousness, waiting to be remembered. The tale of Eden is not a primitive legend. It is a metaphysical cipher. And when decoded, it reveals the truth of who we are, where we came from, and why we feel so exiled from our divine origin. In this video, we're not just revisiting Genesis. We're stripping away thousands of years of misinterpretation to reveal the esoteric blueprint encoded in the Eden story. Eden is not a place in time. It is not a garden on earth. It is a state of consciousness, a sacred frequency humanity once lived in, before descending into the density of illusion. What mainstream religion calls the fall was never a punishment from a wrathful God. It was a descent into a dimension where the soul could experience itself through contrast. It was a choice, a mystery school, an initiation into duality. And that forbidden knowledge wasn't evil. It was the key to awakening. But it came at a cost, one we're still paying. You see, Eden is not about morality. It's about memory. The expulsion from the garden was not a historical event. It was a metaphor for the veil that was placed over the human mind and heart. The veil that made you forget your origin in the infinite. The serpent, the trees, the sword, the banishment, all are archetypal symbols describing a shift in vibrational frequency from unity to separation from eternal, now to linear time, from divine embodiment to spiritual amnesia. And every single one of us carries the echo of that shift in our very cells. That's why we long for something we can't name. That's why we dream of a paradise we've never seen. Because we were there, and we never truly left. The garden lives within your energetic memory. It's just been buried by conditioning, trauma, and control systems designed to keep you from remembering who you are. This story has been weaponized. It has been rewritten to instill guilt and obedience, to demonize the feminine, to paint curiosity as sin, and to create a hierarchy between God and human. But the truth is far more empowering and far more dangerous to those who benefit from spiritual ignorance. Because if you realize that the garden is within you, that you were never cast out, and that the fruit was actually a mirror to your divine sovereignty, then no priest, no system, no doctrine can control you. This is the real threat of the Eden story when read esoterically. It doesn't teach submission. It teaches remembrance. Throughout this journey, we will uncover the deeper meaning of every character, every symbol, every gatekeeper of Eden. We will trace its memory through ancient civilizations, Gnostic texts, mystical traditions, and the very architecture of your energy body. You will meet Lilith, the forgotten guardian. You will decode the two trees as spiritual technologies. You will question whether the serpent was a villain or a liberator. You will see how the garden has never disappeared. It's simply been hidden beneath the constructs of shame, fear, and false history. And most importantly, you'll discover that the return to Eden is not a journey through time or space. It is a return to yourself, a descent inward, a shedding of the false. If you've ever felt like this world was too heavy, too fragmented, too far from truth, this video is your remembering. You didn't stumble onto this by accident. Something inside you has been calling back to the garden, and now the gate is cracking open. But to walk through it, you must first unlearn what you were taught and reawaken what you already know. The garden is not a myth. The garden is a map. Let's begin. Before the garden, before the so-called beginning, there was a different kind of existence, one not bound by time, form, or division. This was the pre-Edenic state, the original harmony of consciousness, where the soul existed not as a separate individual, but as part of a unified field of divine intelligence. In this state, there was no male or female, no light or dark, no inner or outer. All opposites were fused into a singular wholeness, a perfect balance of sacred polarities. The human soul before fragmentation was androgynous in its essence, both masculine and feminine, both creator and creation. There was no need for choice because there was no conflict, no need for movement because there was no distance from source. What we now perceive as physical existence was still only potential, unfolded, undivided whole. This original state is echoed in mystical traditions across the globe. In the Kabbalistic tree of life, it is represented by the Ein Sof, the boundless light before the vessels of the Sephirot formed. In Gnostic texts, it is the Pleroma, a realm of fullness and infinite awareness. In Vedic cosmology, it is Brahman, the undivided totality beyond names and forms. These aren't abstract metaphors. They are descriptions of a conscious state we once knew intimately, but can no longer access easily. Our descent into the garden was not our first emergence. It was already a stepping down, a movement from the eternal into the temporal, from unity into simulation. This pre-Edenic state was not the absence of experience, it was the fullness of it. The soul experienced itself as radiance, vibration, pure knowing. There were no identities, yet all possibilities of identity existed in seed form. The soul was not asleep. It was lucid within the divine dream. But something stirred, a divine tension, a magnetic pull toward manifestation. Not because of lack, but because of the innate creative impulse embedded within the fabric of consciousness itself. Creation is not a response to boredom or emptiness. It is the overflowing of presence. The soul wanted to see itself in form, to experience relationship, to become its own mirror. And so the descent began. The entry into Eden marked the first layer of this descent. Eden was not the highest realm, it was the threshold, the first dimension where consciousness still remembered its unity, but began to experiment with form, polarity, and individuality. Eden was a liminal zone, a radiant field still shimmering with the memory of source, but already seated with the tension of separation. It wasn't a paradise to be lost. It was the veil between spirit and matter, a sacred playground where the soul could begin to test its wings. But like any threshold, it held a paradox. To explore form, we would have to forget the formless. To taste contrast, we would have to fragment. To become I, we would have to lose we. And here is the hidden heartbreak of Eden. We didn't fall from it. We fell through it. Eden wasn't the first home. It was the moment we chose to leave our original home behind. Not in sin, but in sacred curiosity. Not in rebellion, but in divine experiment. And yet that choice carried consequences. not because a god was angry, but because universal law dictates that when you enter the realm of duality, you must play by its rules. The pre-Edenic state, by contrast, was governed by no such rules. There was only harmony, resonance, oneness. The fall didn't begin with Eve or the serpent. It began the moment we said yes to the veil, yes to forgetting, yes to form. Most spiritual seekers today are chasing Eden, believing it to be the goal. But those with deeper eyes realize that even Eden was a compromise. A radiant, shimmering compromise, but a compromise nonetheless. The real home lies behind the veil, before the story, beneath the dream. The memory of that state still echoes in your being. You feel it in moments of stillness, when time disappears. In the ache behind beauty. In the nostalgia you can't explain. That's not emotion. That's memory. Soul memory. You're not just remembering Eden. You're remembering what was before it. And it is to that place we must ultimately return. Not by escaping Earth, but by piercing through the illusion of separation that began not in Eden, but before it was even planted. The Garden of Eden has long been imagined as a physical paradise. Lush trees, flowing rivers, animals in peace, and a divine presence that once walked beside humanity. But this vision, while poetic, is only the surface of a much deeper mystery. The garden was never just a location on Earth. It was and still is a multidimensional energetic field, a frequency, a blueprint of divine consciousness expressed in symbolic form. When ancient texts described Eden, they weren't speaking merely in geographical terms. They were describing a state of being, a vibrational architecture that exists beyond time, accessible not through travel, but through transformation. Eden is encoded within the human psyche as a memory of wholeness. It is the inner terrain where harmony, presence, and soul alignment once flourished. In this sense, the garden was both inside and around the soul, an energetic mirror that reflected divine unity. Its rivers were not only water, but currents of consciousness. Its trees were not mere plants, but living archetypes, vibrational pathways, encoded with the laws of creation. Every detail, from the animals to the landscape, was symbolic of cosmic order. In Eden, there was no division between thought and reality, no barrier between inner and outer. The soul projected its essence outward, and the garden responded like a living dream, blooming, pulsing, in perfect resonance with the spirit's vibration. The reason Eden appears in so many cultures, in the Vedic concept of Swarga, in Sumerian tales of Dilmun, in Celtic myths of Avalon, is because it is part of the collective soul memory of humanity. It is not exclusive to one religion or people. It is the shared origin point from which all myths branch outward. And though these myths differ in detail, they agree in essence there was once a sacred place of perfect harmony from which we became estranged. This estrangement, however, was not due to punishment. It was the inevitable result of consciousness descending into heavier densities, an invitation to learn through limitation, to rediscover divinity from within the illusion of separation. Modern science has hinted at this hidden Eden in surprising ways. Quantum physics reveals that matter is not solid, that reality responds to the observer, and that the field behind the visible world is governed by vibration. This aligns precisely with ancient teachings that describe Eden as a high-frequency realm, accessible only to those in resonance with its purity. It's not that we were forcibly expelled, it's that our frequency dropped. Like a radio tuned to a new station, we lost the signal. And Eden, being a higher octave of reality, became imperceptible to our limited senses. Even now, echoes of Eden remain around us. Certain sacred sites still hum with its memory. Certain dreams still brush against its gates. And most importantly, Eden remains encoded in the human energy field, dormant, waiting to be reactivated. This is why seekers feel a strange longing for something they can't name, why beauty brings tears, why moments of awe feel like home. They are flashbacks, frequency fragments, proof that Eden never vanished, it was veiled. To grasp the true nature of Eden, we must stop treating it as a physical place and begin to recognize it as a state of vibrational purity. In this field, shame does not exist because there is nothing to hide. There is no hierarchy because everything is in balance. The divine is not above or outside, but within all things. Creation is not separate from Creator. This is the Edenic consciousness that we once embodied, and it is the very thing the soul is now remembering. The return to Eden is not a matter of redemption. It is a matter of resonance. When your frequency rises, Eden is no longer lost. It reappears not in the world around you, but in the way you perceive and embody reality. The tragedy of the traditional Eden story is that it externalized paradise and then turned it into a prize we were unworthy of. But the deeper truth is far more empowering. You were never kicked out. You tuned out. You never lost the garden. You forgot how to see it. The tree of life, the flowing rivers, the voice of the divine. Walking with you in the cool of the day, these were all inner realities projected outward through a consciousness still merged with Source. Eden isn't behind us. It's not ahead of us. It's layered beneath the noise of the false self, waiting patiently for remembrance. And as we lift the veil piece by piece, we don't go back to Eden, we become it. At the center of the garden, two trees stood, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This dual tree symbolism is not simply botanical detail. It is a spiritual cipher, a map of polarity embedded into the fabric of consciousness. These trees were not random elements. They were polar forces, codes of unity and division, eternity, and time, harmony, and contrast. To understand Eden, and ultimately to understand yourself, you must decode what these trees truly represent. They were not only trees, they were paradigms. They offered vastly different paths of experience, and the soul's choice between them determined the trajectory of human consciousness. The tree of life is often left unexplored in traditional teachings, overshadowed by the drama surrounding the forbidden tree. Yet in mystical traditions, the tree of life is central. It represents the undivided flow of divine energy. In Kabbalistic teachings, it is the structure of the spiritual world, the roadmap back to Source. It symbolizes the soul's eternal essence, where all polarities are harmonized into one. Eating from the tree of life means living in alignment with divine will, where no separation exists between the knower and the known, between thought and manifestation, between God and soul. In this state, knowledge is not intellectual, it is embodied. You are what you know. You don't need contrast to understand. You comprehend through union, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. On the other hand, represents the descent into polarity. The moment we reach for that tree, we enter the realm of dualism of binaries, judgment, fragmentation. The knowledge it offers is not false, but it comes with a cost, the birth of opposites. Good and evil light and dark right and wrong, These distinctions are necessary for the ego to navigate reality, but they also separate. They create conflict comparison hierarchy. Suddenly, experience is no longer unified. It is divided, categorized, labeled. And once we taste that fruit, we cannot untaste it. The veil descends. Innocence is replaced by awareness, but it is awareness drenched in contrast. This is the core paradox of the tree of knowledge. It expands perception while simultaneously limiting it. But here's the deeper mystery: these trees were never in competition. They were part of the same system. They existed together in balance. One was not good, and the other bad. That dichotomy is itself a product of eating the second fruit. The garden wasn't designed to trap or test the soul. It was designed to offer two kinds of knowledge: knowledge through unity, and knowledge through contrast. One preserves wholeness. The other fractures it in order to rediscover it piece by piece. And the divine allowed both because the journey of the soul involves not just remaining in light, but understanding darkness and integrating it. The real tragedy was not that Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. It's that they did so before grounding themselves in the tree of life. In other words, they sought mental knowledge before anchoring in embodied wisdom. The tree of knowledge wasn't dangerous because it was forbidden. It was dangerous because it was incomplete. When you taste polarity without first mastering unity, you become trapped in your own mind. You see everything through opposites rather than essence. This is why shame emerged, not because God cursed them, but because duality had been internalized. They no longer saw themselves as whole. They saw themselves as naked, as flawed, as separate. These two trees are still alive today, not in a garden far away, but in your daily choices. Every moment you can choose to operate from the tree of life, wholeness, integration, presence, or from the tree of knowledge, judgment, separation, division. The two trees are psychological states, energetic patterns. They are modes of perception. And our world today is largely shaped by a civilization that has fed for millennia on the second tree, while forgetting the first ever existed. To return to Eden is to reverse that pattern. It is to reroot the soul in the tree of life, to awaken the inner axis of divinity that sees beyond the illusion of opposites. But this isn't a matter of rejection, it's a matter of integration. We cannot escape polarity by pretending it doesn't exist. We transcend it by seeing it through the lens of unity. The two trees were never meant to be enemies. They are two strands of the same spiral, two sides of the same mirror. And when you remember that, you stop fighting duality and begin weaving it back into wholeness. Few symbols in human history have been more vilified than the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Branded as Satan, the deceiver, the liar who tempted Eve into disobedience, the serpent has come to embody evil in the eyes of millions. But this interpretation, while dominant in mainstream religion, is deeply limited and dangerously inverted. When we examine the serpent through the lens of esoteric wisdom, ancient mythology, and inner alchemy, a radically different image begins to emerge. The serpent is not merely a symbol of temptation, it is a symbol of transformation. Not the enemy of God, but the awakener of the soul. And what it offers is not sin, but sight. In nearly every ancient culture, the serpent is revered, not reviled. In Egypt, the cobra was the symbol of divine protection and spiritual royalty. In India, The Kundalini serpent lies coiled at the base of the spine, representing dormant spiritual energy that, when awakened, rises up the spine to bring enlightenment. In Mesoamerican traditions, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, is the god of learning, culture, and resurrection. Serpents were always seen as liminal beings, bridging worlds, shedding their skin, dying, and rebirthing. They are ancient guardians of hidden knowledge and catalysts of spiritual awakening. So why in the Genesis story are we told to fear the serpent? The answer lies not in the serpent itself, but in who was telling the story. The Hebrew Bible, like many spiritual texts, went through generations of editing, translation, and agenda-driven recontextualization. In the earlier Gnostic texts and mystery school traditions, the serpent was not a devil, but a liberator. Some even called it Christ in serpentine form, appearing to awaken humanity to their own divine consciousness. The serpent told Eve the truth, that eating the fruit would open their eyes. And it did. The problem wasn't the serpent's lie. There was no lie. The problem was that awakening has consequences. When you move from innocence to awareness, you gain perception, but you also inherit the burden of seeing the shadow. The serpent's appearance in the garden was not an act of sabotage, but an initiation. It brought the feminine principle, the intuitive, the embodied, into direct contact with the first great paradox, that to know is to lose. To awaken is to leave comfort behind. To become conscious is to be cast out of illusion. The serpent did not curse Eve. It offered her agency. And that agency, her choice, is what birthed human individuality. Not as a fall from grace, but as a step into the labyrinth of self-realization. But here's where the inversion happened. Instead of honoring that moment as the soul's courageous first step toward evolution, it was painted as a moral failure. The feminine was demonized, the serpent demonized with her, and the path to knowledge became framed as rebellion rather than remembrance. The archetype of the sacred teacher became fused with the image of the deceiver. But the truth is more nuanced. The serpent represents dangerous knowledge, yes, but not evil. It offers the raw, unfiltered experience of seeing through the illusion of imposed order. And to those clinging to control, that is terrifying. In the language of energy, the serpent represents a spiral just like the DNA in your body, the galaxies above, and the unfolding of time itself. It is the force that coils and uncoils, that winds through mystery and brings hidden truths to light. In the garden, it appears not as an enemy of God, but as a mirror of evolution. It speaks not to Adam, but to Eve, the receptive, intuitive principle, because the feminine holds the key to inner awakening, and it offers not punishment, but potential. The serpent is not the villain of the story. It is the catalyst that made the story possible. By reclaiming the serpent as a symbol of awakening, we reclaim a part of ourselves that has been suppressed for centuries. The part that dares to question, that dares to see, that dares to remember. The serpent is the whisper of your deeper knowing, the pull toward the forbidden parts of yourself that religion told you to fear. But what if those parts were not darkness, but hidden light? What if the real danger was never in the serpent, but in the refusal to listen? Eve has long been remembered as the one who caused the fall of humanity, a symbol of weakness, disobedience, and shame. She is blamed for opening the door to sin, for tempting Adam, and for listening to the serpent. But what if this narrative is completely inverted? What if Eve wasn't the downfall of humanity, but its first awakened soul? What if she was not the cause of separation, but the initiator of consciousness? When we peel back the layers of patriarchal interpretation and return to the archetypal language of the myth, a radically different figure emerges. Eve is not the first sinner. She is the first seer. To rebel against imposed ignorance is not a sin. It is a sacred act of remembrance. Eve's choice to engage the serpent, to taste the fruit, to open her awareness to a broader reality, was not an accident. It was an intuitive response to something deeper, a knowing that the garden, as beautiful as it was not the final destination. It was a container, and she felt the tension within it. The garden was harmony. Yes, but harmony without contrast, innocence without agency, perfection without perspective. Eve's action was not betrayal, it was evolution. She followed the call of the soul to move beyond limitation, even if that path would be painful. The ancient Gnostics saw Eve not as a failure, but as Sophia, the embodiment of divine wisdom in feminine form. In their texts, she is a manifestation of the cosmic mind, descending into matter to initiate the soul's journey through density and forgetfulness. Her engagement with the serpent is not seen as error, but as a sacred exchange between the inner feminine and the archetype of transformative wisdom. In this view, Eve does not fall, she descends with purpose. She takes the first step into individuation, into knowing the self through contrast, through death and rebirth. She is the mythic echo of every soul that dares to awaken. Her so-called disobedience is actually her intuition breaking through the boundaries of containment. She does what Adam could not. She listens. She questions. She acts. And her action sets into motion the journey that all humans now walk, the path of separation and return. Eve is the original seeker, the original truth-teller, the one who steps out of the illusion of perfection and into the mess of awakening. In this sense, she is not the enemy of God, but the embodiment of the divine impulse to evolve. If we see the myth clearly, it is not God who punishes her. It is the system that cannot handle her insight. Her punishment, pain, and childbirth submission to Adam is not divine justice. It is the imposition of hierarchy by a system that fears empowered feminine wisdom. This twist in the narrative came long after the original oral traditions, as patriarchal religion sought to suppress the intuitive, the emotional, the nonlinear, knowing that women often carry. By blaming Eve, the myth severed humanity from its inner knowing. It taught us to fear the feminine, to distrust our own desires for truth, and to see questioning as rebellion instead of revelation. But Eve's legacy is not lost. It lives in every moment we choose to step into awareness, even when it brings discomfort. It lives in the courage to question the rules we were handed. It lives in the quiet voice that says there is more to the story. Eve is not just a character in an ancient myth. She is an archetype alive within us all. She is the moment we stop sleepwalking through paradise and start asking what lies beyond it. She is the first crack in the illusion, the first whisper of the soul's deeper knowing. To reclaim Eve is to reclaim the feminine principle of inner authority. It is to honor the path of the seeker who chooses truth over comfort, embodiment over obedience, wisdom over blind faith. When we stop seeing Eve as the one who caused the fall and start seeing her as the one who dared to awaken, everything changes. The garden no longer becomes a prison we were kicked out of. It becomes the starting point of the soul's great journey. And Eve is not the reason we fell. She is the one who saw that it was time to rise. Adam, the so-called first man, is often portrayed as a passive figure in the Eden story, a quiet receiver of God's breath, a loyal companion to Eve, and ultimately a victim of her disobedience. But beneath that surface-level portrayal lies a deeper esoteric pattern, one that reveals the journey of the masculine principle within consciousness itself. Adam is not simply a man, he is the archetype of individuated awareness, the first embodiment of the ego-bound self. His story is not about obedience or failure. It is about the soul's descent into forgetfulness, into form, into fragmentation. And it begins with a sleep, a mysterious slumber from which he never fully awakens. In Genesis, before Eve is created, God puts Adam into a deep sleep. Curiously, the text never mentions that he wakes up. This detail, often overlooked, holds enormous symbolic weight. Adam's sleep is not physical, it is spiritual amnesia. It represents the first veil placed over the self, the first step into unconsciousness. In that sleep, he forgets his origin, forgets his unity, forgets that Eve is not other, but part of himself. The creation of Eve from Adam's rib is not a literal event. It is the mythic encoding of polarity emerging from unity. The masculine and feminine, once one, are now experienced as separate. And with that split comes the birth of identity. Adam embodies the masculine impulse to name, to define, to control. He names the animals, classifies the world, gives language to experience. This is not inherently wrong. It is the beginning of conscious navigation through duality. But it also carries a cost. In labeling the world, Adam begins to distance himself from it. He no longer sees creation as part of himself, but as something outside to be ordered and managed. The world becomes objectified. The sacred becomes segmented. And thus begins the long arc of masculine consciousness, brilliant in structure, yet often disconnected from its emotional and intuitive roots. When Eve eats the fruit and offers it to Adam, his participation is passive. He does not question. He does not resist. He accepts silently. This silence is not innocence, it is avoidance. Adam represents the part of us that fears the unknown, that clings to stability, that avoids the risk of radical awakening. He does not seek knowledge. He waits for it to come to him. And when it does, his first reaction is shame. This is not because he did something evil. It is because, in his fragmented state, he cannot hold the paradox of being both divine and flawed. He sees his nakedness not as vulnerability, but as weakness. He interprets awareness not as liberation, but as exposure. The ego is born in that moment, an identity built on the fear of being seen. And yet Adam is not a villain. He is not weak. He is simply lost. He mirrors our own inner struggle, the tension between the desire to remain safe and the call to awaken. His journey is the story of every soul who has ever felt torn between comfort and truth. He is the part of us that longs to return to Eden, but doesn't know how to face the pain of separation. His fall is not from grace, but from wholeness. And the path back is not through punishment, but remembrance. In the deeper mystical view, Adam represents the masculine aspect of the soul, which must eventually reunite with the feminine to restore balance. He must awaken from the sleep, not by dominating the feminine, but by learning from her. Eve leads the way, not because she is superior, but because she carries the key to embodiment. Adam's healing begins when he stops blaming and starts listening, when he stops fearing vulnerability and begins to integrate it. The masculine within all of us must evolve from control to compassion, from detachment to presence, from sleep to awareness. The exile from Eden is not the end of Adam's story. It is the beginning of his real journey, not as a passive figure in a myth, but as an archetypal template for spiritual awakening. Adam must walk through the world he once named, now stripped of certainty, and rediscover the divine not in perfection, but in paradox. He must look into the eyes of the feminine Eve Earth, the soul, and see not the cause of his fall, but the guide to his return. The fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil has been the object of centuries of theological speculation and artistic imagination. Was it an apple, a fig, a pomegranate? But to focus on its physical identity is to miss the far deeper question. What did it symbolize? The fruit was never just about disobedience. It represented something far more potent, forbidden integration. It was a catalyst for consciousness, a symbol of the moment the soul stepped beyond innocence into awareness, beyond unity into complexity, beyond Eden into the long road of spiritual individuation. To eat the fruit was to merge with a frequency of perception that introduced duality into a consciousness that had only known oneness. It wasn't about acquiring evil knowledge, but about experiencing knowledge in a fractured form, divided into categories, judgments, polarities. The act of eating was not sinful in the moral sense. It was alchemical. It transmuted the human perception of reality. In tasting the fruit, the human template activated a new mode of consciousness, one that could distinguish, compare separate, and analyze. But with this gift came disorientation. What was once experienced as a unified field of divine presence was now broken into pieces: good and evil, right and wrong, self and other. This is what made the fruit forbidden. Not because the knowledge it carried was inherently wrong, but because the human soul had not yet anchored the spiritual maturity required to integrate that level of awareness. It was like giving a child the tools of fire without the understanding of how to wield them. The fruit accelerated perception, but perception without grounding leads to fragmentation. It gave sight, but sight without wisdom breeds confusion. Humanity gained the power to see, but not yet to understand. And in that dissonance, shame was born. The fruit also shattered the mirror between inner and outer. Before eating, Adam and Eve perceived their reality as an extension of their being. There was no boundary. After eating, the world became something out there objectified, separate at times, threatening. They became aware of themselves as beings, in contrast to the environment, in contrast to each other, even in contrast to the divine. This was not just a psychological shift, it was a metaphysical rupture. And yet, it wasn't without purpose. For only by entering the illusion of separation could the soul undergo the sacred process of remembering its wholeness. In many mystical traditions, the forbidden fruit is not seen as a literal object, but as the activation of the mind. In Kabbalah, it's linked to the dot knowledge that sits between the divine and the manifest. In Gnosticism, it's the moment of gnosis, when the soul awakens to the prison of the material illusion. In alchemy, the fruit is the prima materia, the chaotic raw material that must be transmuted through inner fire. And in Eastern traditions, it mirrors the early stirrings of the Kundalini, when energy rises before the vessel is prepared, resulting in both vision and chaos. The fruit in all these interpretations represents premature initiation, but this premature initiation was not without merit. It set into motion the mythic journey we all now walk to experience contrast, so that we might learn compassion to feel separation, so that we might choose union to know shadow, so that we might embody light. The fruit is not evil. It is truth in its raw, unrefined form. It is the mirror we all face when we awaken and realize that awareness is a gift that cuts both ways. It opens and it divides. To reclaim the fruit is to reclaim our power to integrate opposites, to not be stuck in duality, but to recognize it as a necessary phase in the return to unity. When we fear the fruit, we fear our own potential to awaken. When we demonize knowledge, we sever the bridge to our own divine memory. But when we embrace it, when we eat with reverence, not arrogance, we begin to digest what was once too potent to hold. We become capable of weaving good and evil into wisdom, light and dark into balance. The fruit was never the fall. The inability to integrate what it revealed that was the real exile. The fall has long been framed as humanity's greatest error, a moment of shameful disobedience that brought sin, suffering, and separation into the world. It is portrayed as a mistake so grave that it corrupted all of creation, justifying millennia of guilt, sacrifice, and spiritual hierarchy. But what if that framing is not only misleading, it's entirely inverted? What if the fall wasn't a punishment at all? What if it was a choice, one made not in ignorance, but in profound spiritual courage? What if the fall was not a catastrophe, but a sacred descent, a calculated step into the darkness of matter, so that the soul could know itself more completely? This idea turns conventional theology on its head, but it is not new. In the esoteric traditions, Gnosticism, Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and certain mystical strands of early Christianity, the fall is not viewed as a failure, but as a divine unfolding. The soul, originally unified with Source, desired to experience itself in all its dimensions, not only in light, but in shadow, not only in unity, but in separation. This descent into density, into time, into ego and form, was part of a larger cosmic cycle, not an exile forced by an angry God, but a journey of divine curiosity. The fall was the beginning of individuation, and individuation is the prerequisite for self-realization. From this lens, Eden was not the beginning, and the fall was not the end. Eden was the threshold, and the fall was a doorway into a different kind of knowing. In unity, the soul knows peace, harmony, and presence, but it cannot know courage, forgiveness, resilience, or choice. Those qualities emerge only in a realm of contrast. In choosing to fall, the soul enters a school of mirrors where it forgets its own nature in order to remember it again, not as a collective echo, but as a personal revelation. The suffering that follows is not a punishment. It is the friction required for awakening. Of course, this raises the question, did we really choose to fall, or were we manipulated? Some esoteric teachings, especially those influenced by Gnostic and Sumerian myth, suggest that humanity was tricked, seeded into a reality ruled by archonic forces, trapped in a false matrix designed to feed off our energy and keep us in forgetfulness. In this view, the fall was not fully voluntary, but hijacked our descent into form, co-opted by parasitic entities who embedded fear, shame, and amnesia into the human experience. The garden in this narrative was not just a field of light, it was also a controlled simulation. And the serpent's invitation to awaken, while genuine, came with strings attached. But perhaps these two perspectives are not mutually exclusive. Perhaps the fall was both a choice and a trap. Perhaps we agreed to enter this density knowing it would be difficult, but we underestimated just how deep the illusion would go, how thoroughly we would forget how much fear and control would distort our journey. The soul may have chosen to fall, but the system into which it fell was weaponized. And that is why awakening is so hard, because we are not just remembering truth, we are dismantling the lies layered over it. The fall wasn't just a descent into matter, it became a descent into manipulated perception, into inverted archetypes, into a dream designed to make us doubt we ever came from light. Still, even in that distortion, the original spark remains. The fall is not final. It is part of a cycle. Just as the seasons move from light to darkness and back again, the soul moves from unity to separation and returns bearing gifts. What began as a descent becomes a spiral ascent. Every moment of pain becomes raw material for wisdom. Every illusion, when seen, clearly becomes a stepping stone back to the real. The trap becomes the teacher. The exile becomes the catalyst. The soul begins to remember that the very act of falling contained the seed of its return. So was it a trap? Yes, in part. Was it a choice? Also yes. But most of all, it was an invitation to experience the full spectrum of being, to forget to fracture, to search, and to find again. The fall is not shameful, it is sacred. It is the mythic code of becoming. And when we embrace it as such, we reclaim not just Eden, but the reason we left it in the first place. Beyond the idyllic surface of the Eden narrative lies a shadowy presence rarely discussed in mainstream interpretations, the gatekeepers of the garden. After Adam and Eve were expelled, Genesis mentions that cherubim and a flaming sword were stationed at the east of Eden to guard the way to the tree of life. This detail, often dismissed as poetic imagery, is in fact a profound esoteric clue. Who were these guardians? Why was the tree of life placed under lockdown? And more intriguingly, were they always protecting us from danger? Or were they protecting something from us? To understand this, we must turn to the ancient book of Enoch and the mythos surrounding the Watchers. In that tradition, the Watchers were powerful celestial beings, intermediaries between realms, who descended to Earth, mingled with humanity, and ultimately violated divine law by sharing forbidden knowledge. They taught humanity the secrets of weaponry, enchantment, astrology, and seduction. They birthed the Nephilim hybrid giants, whose presence disrupted the balance of Earth. For their transgression, the Watchers were bound and cast into the abyss. But before their fall, they operated as cosmic gatekeepers, beings who held the thresholds between realms, knowledge, and frequencies. In this broader mythic landscape, the gatekeepers of Eden may not have been benevolent protectors, but Watcher-like entities stationed to prevent premature re-entry into higher consciousness. After the fall, humanity's vibration dropped. To approach the tree of life representing divine unity and immortality without sufficient purification would result in distortion or annihilation. The flaming sword wasn't just a weapon. It was a frequency firewall, a vibrational guardian. It didn't punish. It burned away everything that wasn't truth. And the cherubim, they weren't winged infants. They were complex, multi-dimensional beings, sphinx-like, lion-faced, eagle-eyed archetypal forces, guarding sacred thresholds beyond human comprehension. But here's where the mystery deepens. Were these entities stationed there by a divine source out of love and protection, or were they co-opted into a larger control system? Some esoteric traditions argue that Eden's exile created an opportunity for other forces to intercept the human journey entities that feed off separation, who benefit from humanity's ignorance of its own power. In this view, the Watchers, whether fallen or still operating from the shadows, continue to gatekeep access to Edenic consciousness, not out of protection, but control. They operate through systems of dogma, trauma, and shame, encoded into religion, culture, and even the architecture of our minds. These guardians are not simply external. They also exist within. The moment we try to ascend into deeper awareness, we meet internal watchers, the parts of us programmed to block expansion. These gatekeepers appear as fear, guilt, self-sabotage, and doubt. They echo the original programming that says you are not worthy to approach the tree, that you must stay small. That truth is dangerous. The path back to Eden is not just spiritual, it is psychological warfare against the inner watchers that guard the gates of remembrance. And every time we transmute fear into courage, shame into self-compassion, fragmentation into integration, we disarm one of them. Still, not all watchers are fallen. The archetype of the gatekeeper is not inherently malevolent. In many traditions, the guardian of sacred space is a necessary force. You do not get to enter the temple of the soul without passing through fire. Initiation requires challenge. The tree of life cannot be accessed by those who still carry the frequency of division. The watchers in this sense are initiators. They hold the threshold until you are ready, not in judgment, but in alignment with universal law. They are not meant to keep you out forever. They are meant to ask, are you ready to be whole? Thus, the true nature of Eden's gatekeepers is paradoxical. They are both obstacle and ally, both trap and test. Some may have been corrupted, turned into control mechanisms. Others remain as sacred sentinels. But all of them reflect a truth: re-entering Eden is not a casual stroll through memory lane. It is a radical transformation of frequency perception and selfhood. And whether the gatekeeper stands at the edge of a mythic garden or within the corridors of your own psyche, it asks the same question. Are you willing to die to the false and be reborn in truth? After Adam and Eve's expulsion from the garden, a single haunting image remains a flaming sword, turning every direction, guarding the path to the tree of life. It is one of the most striking and cryptic symbols in all of Genesis, and yet few ever pause to ask what it really means. Why a sword? Why fire? Why does it turn every way? At first glance, it might seem like a warning, a divine weapon designed to prevent re-entry. But deeper esoteric traditions reveal this sword as something far more profound. It is not a punishment, but a mirror. Not a weapon of wrath, but a symbol of initiation. The flaming sword is not simply blocking the way, it is showing us how to return. In mythic symbolism, the sword has always represented discernment, the ability to cut through illusion, to separate truth from falsehood. Fire, meanwhile, has long been associated with purification, transformation, and the burning away of impurities. Together, a flaming sword becomes a force that tests the soul's readiness to re-enter higher states of consciousness. It doesn't merely reject, it refines. It doesn't attack, it reveals. The turning in every direction is key. This is not a static barrier. It is a dynamic, living field of energy that reflects all directions of the self, every contradiction, every shadow, every unresolved trauma. To approach the tree of life again, one must pass through the fire of inner transformation. One must face oneself completely. The sword is not outside us, it is within. It manifests every time we try to transcend ego structures that are still unresolved. When you attempt to access divine wisdom while still clinging to fear, pride, shame, or denial, the flaming sword rises. Not to destroy you, but to stop you from bypassing the process. It is the soul's safeguard, the threshold guardian built into the fabric of spiritual evolution. It demands authenticity. It demands integration. And it cannot be tricked. You can't fake readiness to return to Eden. You must become the frequency that resonates with it. Anything less, and the sword turns to face you, reflecting back what is not yet healed. In alchemical and mystical traditions, fire is the element that tempers the soul. The flaming sword functions like an internal crucible, revealing the parts of us still fractured, still fragmented, still split from source. It is the moment of reckoning when we realize that divine remembrance is not an escape from pain, but a passage through it. And this is where most seekers stop. They sense the sword, the heat, the challenge, and they retreat. They think they've been rejected. In truth, they've simply not yet chosen to let go of the false self that cannot enter. The flaming sword does not guard Eden from us. It guards Eden for us until we are capable of embodying it. Some esoteric teachings go further. They suggest that the flaming sword encodes not only purification, but a forgotten technology of consciousness. It is said to represent the awakened spine, the inner axis of light, known in yogic systems as the Sushumna channel, through which Kundalini ascends. In this view, the sword is not an external gate, but the energetic spine lit by the fire of inner awakening. To pass it is to activate the divine fire within, to raise the inner serpent upward, and to open the crown of the soul to the remembrance of Eden. The sword, turning in all directions, mirrors the multidirectional energy flow of the awakened light body. It doesn't cut indiscriminately. It cuts through illusion. There is a reason this symbol appears only after the expulsion. Before the fall, there was no need for purification. Consciousness existed in alignment. But once duality entered the field, the return path had to include initiation. And initiation is never comfortable. The flaming sword is the great initiator. It says you may only pass if you are whole. You may only touch the tree of life again if you have transmuted the tree of knowledge, not by denying it, but by integrating it. You must bring both light and shadow to the altar and let them be consumed by fire. So the next time you feel blocked from truth or distanced from divine remembrance, ask yourself, not what is outside holding you back, but what within you still needs to burn. The sword is not a guard of punishment. It is a guardian of resonance. It will not open for force or cleverness. It opens only to those who have already let the fire pass through them. Because only those who have faced themselves completely are capable of carrying the frequency of Eden once more. The moment Adam and Eve are expelled from the Garden of Eden is often seen as the climax of the story, a decisive punishment, a one-way exit, a divine decree. But the symbolism of this expulsion runs far deeper than the image of two guilty humans cast out of paradise. In truth, this moment marks not simply a movement through space, but a profound metaphysical shift in the nature of human consciousness. It is the moment the soul entered the illusion of separation, the density of matter, the wheel of incarnation. And with that descent came the most devastating consequence of all, not death, not labor, not suffering, but amnesia. When Adam and Eve leave the garden, they do not only leave a place, they leave a state of being. They move from vibrational unity into fragmented awareness. In Eden, they were one with nature, with each other, and with the divine. There was no I and other. All things were connected through resonance and presence. But the moment they crossed the threshold into exile, they became identified with the form, with the ego, with the fear of death. The soul forgot its origin. The garden didn't disappear. It simply became veiled. Humanity didn't lose paradise. It lost the memory of how to see it. This is the true wound of the fall, not sin, but forgetfulness. The expulsion is the symbolic encoding of incarnation, the descent into time-bound, limited embodied existence. The soul, once luminous and whole, now takes on a body, a name, a culture, a personality. And each of these layers becomes a veil. The further the soul journeys into material experience, the more it forgets its essence. It begins to identify with roles, with trauma, with stories. It believes it is the mask it wears. It sees only through the lens of the personal. And the deeper it goes, the more the memory of the garden fades. But this amnesia is not a mistake. It is a necessary veil designed to create the conditions for true choice. In the garden, there was no choice, only harmony. Outside the garden, in the density of earth, the soul can experience contrast, challenge, uncertainty. These are the raw materials of wisdom. They are the fires through which remembrance must be earned. The divine did not banish us in anger. It allowed us to leave, so we could grow, so we could discover, so we could return not as children of innocence, but as sovereign creators. The expulsion is the beginning of the soul's quest, not a sentence, but a summons. In ancient initiatory traditions, the exile from paradise is reenacted symbolically. The initiate is blindfolded, stripped of identity, led through darkness. They are made to forget who they are, so that through inner death and rebirth, they may remember who they truly are, not by instruction, but by revelation. This is the sacred path of all souls. The story of Eden is your story. You were expelled. You forgot. You descended into matter, but not because you failed, because you chose to awaken from within illusion. This is why the memory of Eden lingers like a dream we can't quite place. We carry the echo. We live with the ache of something lost that was never meant to be forgotten. And yet the memory cannot be fully erased. It surfaces in our longing for beauty, our hunger for love, our moments of stillness when time seems to stop. It whispers in mystical experiences, in dreams, in déjà vu. It calls from inside every spiritual practice, every quest for truth. Even in the pain of separation, something ancient remains untouched. This is the seed of Eden, buried in the soil of the soul. And no matter how many lifetimes pass, no matter how deep the amnesia, that seed cannot die. It waits for water. It waits for light. It waits for your attention. The expulsion from the garden was not a closing of the path, it was the beginning of the spiral. The soul was not meant to stay in innocence forever. Innocence is static, but wisdom moves. Growth requires forgetting, falling, failing, and then rising, integrating, remembering. The exile was never a punishment. It was an invitation to become something more. And every moment you choose awareness over reaction, presence, over distraction, love over fear, you take a step back toward that forgotten place. The garden is still there, but it lives not in the sky, nor in the past. It lives in the space between memory and awakening, waiting for you to turn inward and remember the path you chose long ago. After the expulsion from Eden, the story doesn't pause, it deepens. The tale of Cain and Abel, often taught as a simple moral warning about jealousy or fratricide, is in fact the first mirror of how the fall fractured not only humanity's relationship with the divine, but with itself. It is the moment when the soul, once unified in Eden, begins to experience the consequence of duality playing out in the human psyche. Cain and Abel are not just two brothers. They are two aspects of consciousness, two frequencies born into a divided world, forced to navigate the shadows that Eden never knew. Cain represents the part of us that clings to form, to structure, to material expression. He is the archetype of the ego self-seeking validation through external works. His offering a harvest of crops is not inherently inferior, but it is transactional. It reflects a consciousness of effort measurement and performance. Abel, on the other hand, represents the surrendered self, the archetype of devotion and trust. His offering of the firstborn of the flock is not about superiority, but about resonance. It symbolizes an energetic alignment with divine flow, a recognition that what is given in spirit outweighs what is measured in form. God's favor in this context is not preference, it is frequency recognition. The rejection Cain feels is not from a cruel deity, it is the internal ache of misalignment. It is the pain of the ego when it faces the mirror of unconditional love and realizes it cannot control it. That ache quickly transforms into resentment, not because Abel did anything wrong, but because his presence magnifies Cain's sense of inadequacy. And this is where the shadow is born, not in violence, but in comparison. For the first time, humanity experiences the sickness of lack, the illusion that one must take from another in order to be seen, valued, or accepted. The murder of Abel is the externalization of an internal war, the war between wholeness and woundedness, between presence and performance. But even in this act of violence, the divine does not respond with annihilation. God does not kill Cain. Instead, he marks him not as a curse, but as a sign of protection. This mark, often misunderstood, is a profound spiritual symbol. It suggests that even in our most fallen state, the divine does not abandon us. Cain is exiled, yes, but not erased. He becomes a wanderer, which is another layer of the soul's journey movement, through fragmentation, seeking reconciliation. Cain's path mirrors our own when we've betrayed ourselves, when we've projected our pain outward, when we've acted from separation and suffered the consequence. His story tells us that, even in shadow, we are still seen. The deeper tragedy of Cain and Abel is not just the loss of life, it is the loss of the memory that we are not separate. The split that began in Eden continues in their story. Now it plays out not between humanity and God, but within humanity itself. Cain cannot see Abel as an extension of himself. He sees a rival, not a reflection. This is the root of all conflict, all violence, all oppression, the inability to recognize the other as the self. And yet the myth carries a hidden hope. If shadow is where we first kill each other, then shadow is also where healing can begin. To integrate Cain is to confront the parts of ourselves that still seek approval through effort, that lash out when unseen, that measure worth in comparison to others. To honor Abel is to awaken the part of us that still remembers how to give from wholeness. In many ways, Cain and Abel are still alive today, not as literal people, but as patterns of perception. Every time we feel envy, rejection, or the urge to compete rather than connect, we reenact their story. And every time we pause, breathe, and offer from love rather than lack, we shift the script. The post-Edenic world is not doomed. It is the stage on which these archetypes play out, giving us the chance to choose again and again which voice we will follow, the one of fear and fracture, or the one of remembrance and resonance. Cain and Abel are not about good and evil. They are about fragmentation and the attempt to find our way back. The story is not telling us to be one and not the other. It's calling us to integrate both, to hold Cain with compassion, to honor Abel without pride, to see that both were born of the same parents from the same fall and carry the same longing to be seen, to be whole, to be home. Long before Eve was ever formed from Adam's rib, there was Lilith, a name erased from most versions of Genesis, yet echoing loudly in ancient mysticism, folklore, and esoteric tradition. She was said to be the first woman created not from Adam, but alongside him from the same earth. Unlike Eve, Lilith was not formed as a secondary being, a helper, or subordinate. She was his equal, a mirror, a sovereign consciousness. And it is precisely this equality that led to her rejection, not by God, but by the emerging hierarchy of the masculine world. Lilith refused to bow. She would not lie beneath Adam. She would not play the role of the silent partner. And for that, she was cast out not from Eden alone, but from history. Lilith's story is not just a tale of defiance. It is a buried key to understanding the lost balance of Eden. She represents the unfiltered, divine, feminine, wild, intuitive, sexual, untamed by doctrine. Where Eve is molded into acceptable femininity, soft, obedient, nurturing Lilith is fire, boundary, and thunder. She is not the cause of chaos, but the suppressed aspect of the feminine that, when denied, becomes demonized. And indeed, in later rabbinic literature, she is depicted as a demoness, a devourer of children, a temptress of men. These are not historical facts. They are psychological projections, manifestations of fear in the face of ungoverned feminine power. But what if Lilith was never a demon, but a guardian? What if her removal from the Eden narrative was not divine will, but cultural editing? Lilith may well have been the original protector of Eden's sacred balance, the gatekeeper between unmanifest unity and polarized form. In some esoteric traditions, she is seen as the serpent itself, not a tempter, but an awakener. She did not want to trap Adam or Eve, but to remind them of their own sovereignty. She did not whisper deceit. She offered the truth that integration cannot come without risk. In this view, Lilith is the one who remembers the pre-Edenic state, the original harmony before form was divided, and she carries the map back through shadow. Her expulsion from the garden marks the first exile not of humanity, but of the feminine principle that would no longer be welcomed in its full expression. When Lilith was rejected, balance was broken. The masculine was left without its equal counterpart. The result was imbalance not just between man and woman, but within each human soul. Every person, regardless of gender, contains both masculine and feminine energies. To exile Lilith is to exile your own wild knowing, your own embodied truth, your own sacred rage. And when this inner feminine is not acknowledged, it turns inward, becoming depression, self-doubt, disconnection from nature and intuition. To reintegrate Lilith is to reclaim what was buried beneath millennia of dogma. It is to welcome the parts of yourself that challenge the rules that don't fit in polite systems of worship. It is to listen to your dreams, your instincts, your body. It is to let the feminine be both nurturing and fierce, receptive and commanding, soft and unyielding. It is to honor desire not as a sin, but as a compass. The suppression of Lilith was never about holiness, it was about control. Because a soul connected to the wild feminine cannot be owned, manipulated, or shamed into obedience. Lilith's return is already underway. She is rising not as a myth, but as an archetype in the collective psyche. She is the surge of intuition you feel when logic fails. She is the fire in your gut that says no more when a boundary is crossed. She is the voice that whispers that paradise was never lost, it was stolen, and it can be reclaimed, but not by pretending to be pure, not by becoming palatable, only by becoming whole. And to be whole, you must walk with Lilith not as a threat, but as a guide. The garden was never just a place of light. It had shadow, it had secrets, it had power that frightened those who could not wield it. Lilith holds the key to that hidden garden, the one behind the one we were taught. She is not the opposite of Eve. She is her missing half. And until we remember Lilith, the Eden story remains incomplete. The return to Eden does not begin with innocence, it begins with truth. And Lilith is that truth, wild and holy, waiting at the edge of your memory, asking only that you stop fearing what you already are. We've been told that Eden was a location in the ancient past, a paradise lost somewhere in Mesopotamia, perhaps guarded by angels or buried beneath history. But what if Eden was never meant to be found on a map? What if its coordinates were never geographical but energetic? What if the entire structure of Eden, its harmony, its sacred geometry, its resonance with divine presence was not destroyed but transferred, not to the outer world but to the inner body? The truth is, Eden did not vanish. It migrated. It was encoded within the human energy field, carried by the soul as a living imprint of what we once were and what we are still becoming. The human energy field, known across traditions as the aura, the Merkaba, the light body, is not some abstract spiritual concept. It is a structured, dynamic system of information and frequency. It contains the full blueprint of your soul, your incarnational memories, and your connection to Source. When Adam and Eve fell, they did not simply walk out of a garden, they shifted frequencies. Their subtle energy fields dimmed. Their luminous bodies, once fully activated and connected to the tree of life within, contracted into denser, more fragmented forms. This was the true exile, not from a physical paradise, but from the full activation of the divine template. In esoteric anatomy, the tree of life is not an external plant. It is the vertical axis of the body's energy system. It runs through the spine, the chakras, and beyond into higher dimensional strands of consciousness. The Kabbalistic tree of life, with its 10 Sephiroth and 22 connecting paths, is not just a map of divine emanation, but a diagram of the fully awakened human being. Eden, in this sense, was the original alignment of all these spheres, where the body, soul, and spirit functioned in perfect coherence. The rivers of Eden were not just water. They were currents of energy flowing through the subtle meridians, nourishing every layer of our multidimensional being. But once duality entered, that coherence shattered. The energetic channels narrowed. The chakras, once spinning in unified harmony, became centers of distortion, trauma, fragmentation. The light body, once radiant and crystalline, became dormant. Dormant, but not destroyed. This is the hope hidden in the fall, that no matter how far we descend into unconsciousness, the original Edenic pattern remains. It is not erased, it is encoded. And the task of awakening is not to find Eden in some lost past, but to reawaken it within our own system. This is why so many spiritual traditions emphasize embodiment. Meditation, breathwork, movement, sound. These are not rituals for the sake of tradition. They are technologies of remembrance. Every time you breathe with intention, move with awareness, or vibrate with love, you are reconnecting with the Edenic frequency. You are reactivating dormant circuits at the energy field. The serpent coiled at the base of the spine. Kundalini is not evil. It is the sacred life force that, when awakened, consciously rises to restore the tree of life within. This is the real journey back to the garden. It happens not through belief, but through vibrational transformation. And yet there are forces that benefit from keeping this dormant. Systems that profit from disconnection. Institutions that teach the body is sinful, that desire is dangerous, that knowledge is rebellion. Why? Because an awakened energy field cannot be controlled. A person whose inner Eden is alive does not need intermediaries. They become a temple, a sovereign being. And that kind of human is a threat to every structure built on fear. That's why Eden was buried in myth, distorted by literalism, and severed from the human form. The greatest secret is that you never left. You carry the garden inside your own skin. The aura is the atmosphere of Eden. The heart is its sanctuary. The spine is its tree. The breath is its wind. The endocrine system, with its glands of transformation, is the alchemical garden waiting to bloom. You are the soil. You are the seed. You are the serpent, the tree, the fruit, and the flame. Eden is not something you reclaim. It is something you remember. And that remembering is not mental. It is energetic. Every shadow you heal, every truth you embody, every frequency you raise, is one more gate opened. One more flower blooming in the garden within. One more step on the spiral path home. The Garden of Eden, as an energetic state of harmony, wholeness, and divine remembrance, still exists within the human template. But most of us cannot see it. We live in a world that feels cut off, fragmented, artificial. We move through concrete jungles, stare at flickering screens, and try to find meaning in systems built on fear, scarcity, and competition. This isn't because Eden was destroyed. It's because it was covered. An overlay was placed on top of the original garden frequency, a synthetic structure designed not to nurture the soul, but to keep it asleep. This overlay is what many esoteric traditions now refer to as the Matrix. The Matrix is not just a metaphor from a film. It is an actual vibrational distortion field. It operates through institutions, beliefs, language, and even digital technology. It mimics reality, but lacks soul. Its purpose is not simply to enslave it, is to distract, to divert the human attention away from the organic remembrance of Eden by offering endless loops of illusion. The Matrix doesn't need to chain the body, it chains the perception. It convinces you that suffering is normal, that separation is natural, that hierarchy is divine. It teaches you to question your intuition, to suppress your emotions, to value the external above the internal. And slowly, Eden fades, not because it is gone, but because you no longer look for it. This overlay hijacks the tree of life within you. Each chakra, originally designed as a gateway to multidimensional awareness, is repurposed by the Matrix to anchor you into density. Instead of spinning in harmony with cosmic intelligence, they become centers of survival, desire, fear, ego, and control. This is not accidental. The lower frequencies of consciousness are easier to manage. A society built on unresolved trauma, internalized shame, and false identity is far easier to manipulate than one rooted in sovereignty. The garden within becomes buried under layers of programming media dogma, family patterns, and unprocessed pain. Even religion, which should be the path back to Eden, is often weaponized by the Matrix. The Eden story is retold not as a tale of evolution, but as a narrative of guilt. Eve becomes the scapegoat. The serpent becomes the devil. The fall becomes an eternal curse. And salvation becomes externalized, placed in the hands of priests, books, and distant heavens. The power to remember Eden is relocated outside of you, just out of reach, always conditional, always delayed. But that was never the original message. The Edenic blueprint is not waiting for permission. It is waiting for attention. To begin dismantling the Matrix overlay, we must first recognize it. It shows up every time you feel disconnected from your body, every time you doubt your worth, every time you seek approval instead of alignment, every time you forget that you are the garden. The overlay is not invincible. It feeds on unconsciousness. But once you see it, once you name it, its grip begins to loosen. The Matrix cannot hold a mind that has become self-aware. It cannot hijack a soul that has remembered the original song. This is the great spiritual battle of our age, not angels versus demons, but synthetic programming versus organic divinity. Every choice you make to move from reaction to presence, from fear to trust, from dissociation to embodiment, you reclaim a piece of Eden. The garden re-emerges not in the world first, but in your frequency. And as enough humans begin to awaken this original resonance, the overlay cannot sustain itself. It was never built to hold truth. It was built to distort it. The garden is not destroyed, it is camouflaged. But it can be reactivated. It lives in the heart's coherence, the body's wisdom, the stillness behind the noise. The more you step out of conditioned identity, the more clearly the real landscape emerges. You begin to feel the sacredness in trees, the intelligence in silence, the communion in breath. You remember that Eden is not a paradise to return to after death. It is the living field of consciousness beneath this one, waiting for your eyes to shift your frequency, to rise your will, to say, I am ready to see again. And when you do, the overlay begins to flicker. The simulation loses power. And the garden that was always there, always inside you, begins to shine through. The Garden of Eden is not unique to the Hebrew Bible. In fact, when we step outside the narrow lens of Western theology, and peer into the ancient spiritual traditions of the world, we begin to see something astonishing. Nearly every culture carries its own memory of Eden. Though the names and symbols change, the essence remains a sacred realm of harmony, immortality, and divine communion, which was lost, veiled, or descended into myth. These aren't disconnected myths. They are fragments of a universal truth echoing through time. Together, they suggest that Eden was never just a local story. It was a global memory, a soul blueprint shared by humanity before language, before empire, before division. In the Sumerian tradition, long before the Genesis text was written, we find the myth of Dilmun, a pure and radiant land where sickness, aging, and death did not exist. Dilmun was said to be a place where the raven does not croak, the lion does not kill the wolf, does not snatch the lamb. It was a land untouched by pain, a mirror of Eden's harmony. But in the myths, Dilmun too is disrupted by the introduction of complexity, mortality, and the fragmentation of natural order. This ancient Mesopotamian story predates Genesis by centuries, suggesting that the archetype of the lost paradise existed long before the biblical codification of Eden. In Hindu cosmology, we find the idea of Satya Yuga, the first of 4 great ages, known as the Age of Truth. During this golden age, all beings lived in perfect alignment with Dharma cosmic law. There was no suffering, no deception, no fear. Nature responded to intention. The gods walked among humans. Over time, as yugas progressed into more dense and ignorant ages, humanity lost its connection to this original state. Sound familiar? The Hindu view doesn't depict a fall caused by a mistake, but a gradual descent in consciousness, a spiral, not a punishment. Still, the underlying idea is identical to Eden. We once lived in unity, and now we live in amnesia. The Egyptian field of reeds, Aru, is another version of Eden. It is described as a paradisiacal dimension, where the soul, if it passed judgment and lived in truth, would dwell eternally. There, everything was abundant and balanced. Fields grew food effortlessly, the sun shone eternally, and the soul was free from chaos. Yet this paradise could only be reached by a soul that had remembered the Ma'at, the inner balance of truth, harmony, and order. Again, paradise is not just a reward, it's a resonance. It requires inner alignment, and it reflects the same principle found in Eden, that divine harmony is conditional, not on location, but on frequency. The indigenous peoples of North and South America also hold stories of a time before the forgetting. In Andean cosmology, the Inca spoke of Pachacuti, a cyclic movement of time, where human consciousness rises and falls, but always returns to the original harmony of Pachamama, the earth, as sacred mother. Similarly, the Hopi speak of earlier worlds or epochs, where human beings lived in balance with the earth, until they lost their way through greed, violence, and forgetting the sacred. In each case, the myth does not end in permanent loss, but in a call to remember. The garden may be lost, but it is never gone. Even in Eastern Taoist philosophy, the ideal state is one of effortless harmony with the Tao, the way. The Tao is not a garden, but a flow of universal order, a path of non-resistance. In the Taoist paradise, man does not dominate nature, but walks in step with it, following its rhythms, not controlling them. Here again we see Eden, not as a literal garden, but as a symbolic landscape, representing the soul's original attunement with cosmic law. These parallels across cultures and millennia suggests something profound, that Eden was not a place, but a state of being once collectively held by early humanity. Before language fractured thought, before empires shaped religion, before trauma rewired perception, humanity remembered Eden. That memory is the root of every longing for peace, every vision of heaven, every sacred myth. It is not a fantasy. It is a fractured memory encoded in every soul, in every tradition, waiting to be reassembled. To study these ancient stories is not merely an academic exercise, it is a spiritual excavation. We are not looking at differences in belief, we are tracing the scattered bones of a single forgotten body. And that body is us. The garden is the inner sanctuary behind every myth. The tree of life grows in every heart that still believes in wholeness. And each culture in its own way has been trying to say, you were never alone. You were never separate. You only forgot the way home. The garden was never destroyed. It was buried under layers of fear, trauma, and disconnection. The path back is not forward in time or somewhere in space. It is inward. The return to Eden is not a reward for moral purity or religious obedience. It is the natural consequence of awakening the dormant blueprint encoded within every human soul. This blueprint is not metaphorical. It is real. It lives in the body's energy field, in the spiraling geometry of DNA, in the frequencies of the heart, and the silence behind your thoughts. To awaken, it is not to escape the world, but to see the world differently. Eden is not found, it is remembered. But remembrance requires purification, not moral perfection, but energetic clarity. As long as we are tangled in judgment, addiction to suffering, or identification with victimhood, the Edenic frequency remains inaccessible. Not because it is far away, but because it is subtle. It vibrates beyond the noise of mental fragmentation. It doesn't shout. It whispers. And only when the soul is still enough, humble enough, and open enough can the whisper be heard. The return path begins not with effort, but with intention. A clear, sincere desire to reconnect, not with a place, but with a presence. There are many paths to this awakening, but all of them lead through the heart. Not the sentimental heart of emotions, but the sacred heart, the center of coherence, where the divine intelligence of the soul speaks through resonance, not logic. Heart coherence has been studied scientifically, revealing that the electromagnetic field of the heart is far stronger than that of the brain. When the heart enters resonance through breath, gratitude, devotion, the entire system shifts. The nervous system calms. The mind becomes clear. The body enters harmony. In this state, the Edenic frequency begins to return, not as an image, but as a feeling. Breath is another key. Not just ordinary breath, but conscious, sacred breath. In ancient practices from pranayama to qigong, breath is understood as a bridge between the seen and the unseen. It moves energy, clears distortion, and reopens the channels that once flowed freely in Eden. When breath becomes prayer, it awakens memory. Each inhale becomes a call to life, each exhale a release of illusion. Over time, with presence and intention, the subtle body begins to awaken. The spine reactivates as the tree of life. The inner rivers begin to flow. The garden begins to re-emerge within. But perhaps the most important piece of the return path is integration. Too often seekers want escape. They long for light without shadow, transcendence without embodiment. But Eden cannot be entered through avoidance. It requires the full embrace of all that is, especially the broken parts. The parts you reject, deny, or hide are the very gateways back to wholeness. Shadow work, emotional healing, trauma release. These are not distractions from spirituality. They are the spiritual path. Every time you face the pain instead of numbing it, you water the roots of the garden within. Ancient traditions knew this. The initiates of Egypt, the yogis of India, the shamans of the Americas all had rites designed to return the soul to its Edenic state. These rites were not about salvation. They were about stripping away illusion, facing death, integrating duality, and ultimately remembering I am that I seek. The Edenic blueprint does not demand perfection. It requires presence, to sit in stillness, to walk with awareness, to feel without judgment, to speak from truth. These are not spiritual cliches, they are vibrational keys. The return to Eden is not an event. It is a frequency shift that happens in layers. Moments of clarity, moments of beauty, moments where time stops, and you remember for just a second that everything is sacred. The more you honor these moments, the more they grow. Eventually, the garden becomes not a memory, but your atmosphere. Not a myth, but your lived reality. Not as an escape from earth, but as the rebirth of heaven through earth. We were never meant to stay fallen. The story was never meant to end in exile. Eden was not a test we failed, but a vibration we lost. And now, in this age of remembering, we are being called not to reach for Eden, but to become it. One breath, one choice, one healing at a time. If the exile from Eden was a fall from unity, then the return to Eden must involve restoring what was divided. And at the heart of that division lies the suppression of the divine feminine. For millennia, the feminine aspect of divinity, intuition, emotion, receptivity, sensuality, cyclic wisdom was severed from mainstream spirituality. Lilith was demonized, Eve was blamed, and the serpent, an ancient symbol of feminine power and awakening, was turned into the embodiment of evil. This wasn't just a rewriting of myth, it was a severing of the soul from its own roots. The loss of the garden was never only about the loss of innocence, it was the loss of her, the womb of the world, the voice beneath the silence, the wisdom of the earth. To understand Eden's rebirth, we must first understand what was buried. The feminine in Eden was not submissive or secondary. She was the pulse of life, the rhythm of the garden itself. Eve's act of reaching for the fruit was not rebellion, it was initiation. But instead of honoring her choice as a move toward consciousness, religion reframed it as a sin. This distortion became a blueprint for centuries of control. The feminine, once revered as sacred, became feared. Her body became taboo. Her voice silenced. Her power hidden. And with her, the garden disappeared from view, not because it was destroyed, but because the eyes needed to see. It were shamed into blindness. Reclaiming Eden means reclaiming her, not just in women, but in all of us. The divine feminine is not about gender. It is a mode of consciousness, an intelligence that dwells in presence rather than pressure, in being rather than doing. It is what knows the earth as alive, the body as sacred, and the unseen as just as real as the visible. Without her, the garden remains locked. The tree of life becomes inaccessible. The gates do not open to force, they open to resonance, to surrender, to trust. These are the keys the feminine carries, and without them, no return is possible. The feminine rebirth does not mean replacing masculine structures with feminine ones. It means healing the rupture between them. The garden flourished because both energies danced in balance, sun and moon, giving and receiving logic and intuition. The fall occurred when one side sought to dominate, to control, to exclude. To restore Eden, we must allow the feminine to speak again through dreams, through art, through nature, through the body's wisdom. We must listen to the parts of ourselves we once silenced in order to survive. The tears we held back, the instincts we dismissed, the sacred no we were afraid to speak. The feminine rebirth is not gentle, it is fierce. It calls us to dismantle what is false so that what is real can bloom. This rebirth is already underway. Around the world, ancient feminine wisdom is rising from the earth-based traditions of indigenous cultures to the resurgence of womb mysteries, to the retranslation of sacred texts with an eye for what was omitted. Women are awakening. Men are awakening. And what they are remembering is not a doctrine, but a rhythm. The rhythm of the garden. The pulse of a world where life is not dominated, but honored. Where the divine is not distant, but embodied. Where power is not taken, but cultivated. To return to Eden is to return to the feminine. Not as an idea, but as an experience. To trust your body again. To let yourself rest. To move at the speed of truth rather than the speed of expectation. To cry when something hurts. To speak when something feels off. To reconnect with the living earth not as a resource, but as a mother. These aren't soft teachings. They are revolutionary. Because in a world built on exile, choosing to remember your belonging is an act of defiance. And the feminine knows how to belong. She is the thread that weaves heaven into earth spirit, into form, love into structure. Eden was never a sterile paradise. It was wild, fertile, alive. And that wildness, that capacity for untamed beauty, emotional depth, and creative chaos is what the feminine brings back when she rises. The garden doesn't need to be found. She needs to be felt. And that feeling begins when we let her come home into our thoughts, into our breath, into our lives. She is not returning to save us. She is returning because we are finally ready to remember. The Eden story is often told as ancient history, a myth locked in the past. But what if Eden isn't just spiritual memory or symbolic allegory? What if its blueprint still lives within us, coded not only in our soul, but embedded in our cells? Modern science is only beginning to grasp what ancient mystics already knew. The body is not merely a biological machine, it is a cosmic archive. And hidden within its double helix, coiled like a serpent, is a forgotten language. A vibrational script, a record of paradise. Human DNA is composed of over 3 billion base pairs, yet less than 2% is actively used to build proteins. The rest, once dismissed by scientists as junk. DNA has baffled researchers for decades, but this so-called junk is not useless. It is unexpressed potential. Silent code, dormant intelligence waiting for activation. Esoteric teachings suggest that this unused DNA is the very container of humanity's lost Edenic capacities, intuitive abilities, multidimensional perception, cellular regeneration, and harmonic coherence with nature. In other words, Eden was never erased. It was encrypted. Throughout spiritual traditions, we see references to light codes, divine blueprints, or sacred geometries that once structured the perfect human template. The Adam Kadmon of Kabbalah, the perfected light body in Egyptian mysticism, the rainbow body of Tibetan Dzogchen, Each of these speaks to a human state beyond what we currently inhabit, a state that mirrors Eden, not in fantasy but in biology. And what these traditions knew, science is now confirming. DNA is not fixed. It is responsive to frequency, environment, thought, and intention. It listens. It shifts. It remembers. This means that the return to Eden is not only a metaphysical journey, it is also a genetic one. The more we raise our consciousness, the more we shift our vibrational state, the more dormant aspects of our DNA begin to activate. These aren't superpowers for ego inflation. They are the restoration of natural design abilities we once had buried under fear, trauma, and disconnection. The heart field, when coherent, sends signals that can unlock DNA responses related to healing and intuition. Breathwork, sound frequencies, and meditation have all been shown to alter gene expression. What was once dismissed as mysticism is now being measured in labs. But unlocking these Eden codes isn't just about practice, it's about purification. Trauma stores itself in the body as epigenetic residue. Generational pain, unprocessed, emotional wounds, societal conditioning, all of it distorts the clarity of the original signal. The garden becomes harder to hear. The DNA becomes scrambled with interference. To reawaken the Edenic potential, the body must be loved back into coherence. Every act of healing, emotional release, nervous system regulation, inner child work is not just psychological, it is molecular. You are not just processing memories, you are untangling the cords wrapped around your sacred code. We are living in a time where the old story of human limitation is collapsing. The myth of random evolution, of linear progress, of broken biology, is being replaced by a remembrance that we are more than we've been told. Eden is not a metaphor for perfection. It is the encoded memory of harmony. When you feel peace for no reason, when you connect to nature, and it feels like coming home when you look into someone's eyes and remember something beyond words, your DNA is responding. It is pulsing with resonance. It is saying, "This is what we once knew. This is what we can know again." Even our longing is evidence of Eden. The ache to return, the hunger for unity, the drive to heal, these are not flaws. They are signals, activation codes, triggers for awakening. They remind us that Eden is not a goal we strive toward, but a pattern already within us. A pattern that reawakens as we realign. And the more individuals remember, the more the collective field shifts. DNA is not isolated, it is quantum. When one awakens, the field changes. The garden grows. The fall did not destroy our nature, it only concealed it. The serpent did not doom us, it curled up inside our very cells, waiting to rise. We are not broken, we are encrypted. The return to Eden is not an act of seeking, it is an act of allowing. And your body already knows the way. In most interpretations of the Bible, the story of Eden and the story of Christ are treated as separate. One is the beginning of the problem, and the other is the solution. Eden is seen as the site of the fall, where sin entered the world, while Christ is seen as the Redeemer, who offers salvation from that fallen state. But this division misses a deeper esoteric truth. Christ is not the counterpoint to Eden. He is the continuation of it. Not the fix to a mistake, but the activation of a forgotten memory. Christ doesn't come to erase the garden's loss, but to reveal the garden's code hidden within the heart of humanity. Christ is not a name, it is a frequency. a title that represents a consciousness aligned with unconditional love, divine wisdom, embodied truth, and spiritual sovereignty. The Christ consciousness is not confined to a single man, it is a state of being that every soul is capable of entering. And when seen through this lens, Jesus is not simply a savior, he is a mirror. A living demonstration of the Edenic template, restored and walking in the world. His presence was a reactivation of what humanity had forgotten, a reintroduction of Eden through a living vessel. In him, the garden bloomed again, not as a myth, but as embodiment. Look closely, and you will see that Christ's teachings constantly echoed Eden. He spoke in parables about seeds and soil, vines and branches, fig trees and mustard seeds. He walked barefoot, spoke to the wind, and sea retreated into mountains, fasted in the wilderness. His life was not separate from nature, it was integrated with it. He didn't come to build a new religion. He came to awaken what had always been true. His message wasn't one of escape, but of return. The kingdom of God is within you. That kingdom is Eden. It is not a reward after death, it is a reality that begins in remembrance. The crucifixion is not just about suffering, it is the burning away of false identity. The cross itself is symbolic, a vertical axis of spirit, intersecting the horizontal plane of matter. Heaven and earth reunited in one point in the body, in the heart, in presence. The resurrection is the Edenic restoration. It is not just a miracle, it is a template. It shows that death, symbolic or literal, is not the end. That the fallen state is not permanent. That the garden can rise again within flesh, within the world, within form. But this restoration is not automatic. Christ never forced transformation. He invited it. Follow me was not an order, it was an initiation. He showed what was possible when one lives from the Edenic frequency, when love overrides fear, when the inner temple is honored, when the garden is remembered, through action, through forgiveness, through union. Every miracle he performed, turning water into wine, healing the blind, calming storms, was not to show off divinity, but to remind us of what the unfractured human consciousness could do. He was not the exception. He was the example. In the esoteric Christian traditions, the Gnostic texts, the early mystics, this message was clearer. Salvation was not about escaping earth or appeasing God. It was about reactivating the Christ within, awakening the Edenic spark, remembering the divine self. You are God's. Jesus quoted from the Psalms not as blasphemy, but as truth forgotten. But this truth was too dangerous for empires. So the teachings were distorted. The body was turned into a prison, the earth into a place of exile. The feminine once revered as Sophia was erased. The garden was moved from the present moment to some distant afterlife. And Christ, who came to reveal our own divinity, was turned into a distant idol. But his true message remains, not in the dogma, but in the silence between words. In the ache you feel when you hear the phrase, "You are already whole." In the tears that rise when you realize you are loved without condition. This is Eden stirring. This is the Christ light flickering within your chest. You don't have to become worthy. You already are. The path to Eden is the path of presence. And Christ walked it not to be worshipped, but to walk it with you. The Edenic restoration is not a myth, and it is not a metaphor. It is a vibrational process unfolding now. It is the divine memory awakening in your cells, your heart, your breath. The garden was never lost. It was planted in you, waiting for the Christ within to bloom it back into being. As the collective consciousness of humanity begins to rise, an entirely new paradigm is emerging, one that many refer to as the shift to 5D Earth. This isn't science fiction, nor is it a utopian fantasy. It's a real vibrational transformation taking place within individuals' communities and the Earth itself. And at the heart of this shift is the return of Eden, not as a nostalgic past, but as a rebirth of harmony, coherence, and unity. The new Eden is not a garden to walk in. It is a frequency to live from. And 5D is its vibrational field. To understand this, we must first dismantle the illusion that 3D, 4D, and 5D refer to physical locations. They don't. These are levels of consciousness frequency bands that influence how we perceive and interact with reality. 3D is the dimension of separation, control, fear, and survival. It is where Eden is forgotten and the matrix is mistaken for life. 4D is the transitional field, where awakening begins, where the illusions of the old start to unravel, but the ego still fights to hold on. 5D is the return to coherence, where the inner Eden reactivates and spills outward into new patterns of life, relationship, and presence. It is where we begin to see with the eyes of the soul again. 5D Earth does not mean a new planet. It means a new experience of this one. A collective reality that is heart-centered, energetically, sovereign, spiritually awake, and anchored in love instead of fear. In 5D, the old systems of hierarchy, domination, and control begin to collapse, not because of violence, but because they are no longer energetically supported. The new Eden cannot be built on competition, war, or exploitation. It emerges through frequency. And as more souls remember their true nature, the frequency of the collective rises. The garden grows not from the ground up, but from the soul out. This is not about escape. It is not about transcending the body or denying the physical world. 5D Earth and the New Eden are deeply embodied. They are the result of honoring matter as sacred, of seeing the Earth not as a battleground, but as a living, conscious being. Gaia herself is ascending, shedding densities, recalibrating her electromagnetic fields. As she does, she calls her children humans, animals, plants, waters into alignment with her. Those who listen feel it, the increased sensitivity, the dissonance with old systems, the magnetic pull toward simplicity, community, truth. These are not random feelings. They are signs of the Edenic template returning. But this shift is not automatic. It requires participation. You cannot carry 3D fear into 5D life. You cannot build the new Eden with the bricks of the old world. The ego must soften. The nervous system must heal. The heart must open. This is not about bypassing darkness. It is about transmuting it. Every wound integrated becomes soil for the new garden. Every false story shed becomes sunlight for the emerging soul. 5D is not given. It is chosen moment by moment, breath by breath, as we align our internal world with the truth of who we are. In the New Eden, time feels different. It flows rather than pushes. Manifestation happens faster, not because of magic, but because of coherence. Thoughts, words, and energy align. Relationships are based not on need, but resonance. Purpose is not found through striving, but revealed through presence. Work becomes play. Creation becomes sacred. Even death is seen not as an end, but as a transition in a larger symphony of being. This is not wishful thinking. It is the Edenic consciousness beginning to crystallize again through embodied souls. There are already pockets of 5D Earth emerging communities living in harmony with the land, people leaving systems of control to build new models of education, medicine, governance, and healing. These aren't headlines on mainstream news, but they are real. The seeds have been planted, and the rain is falling. The question is not whether the new Eden is coming. The question is whether you are choosing to live as if it's already here, because it is. It's in the way you breathe, the way you listen, the way you speak to your own body, the way you treat others when no one is watching. The garden does not return through prophecy or apocalypse. It returns through you, through the courage to live from the heart, even in a world that still clings to its fear. 5D is not the future, it is now. And Eden is not a promise, it is a frequency. The more you remember it, the more you become it. For centuries, humanity has searched for Eden as if it were a relic, buried somewhere beneath ruins or protected by myth. Theologians mapped it, explorers chased it, artists painted it. And yet all this seeking has overlooked one devastatingly simple truth. Eden was never gone. It was never destroyed. It was never stolen. It was simply hidden in the most intimate, inaccessible, and sacred place of all within you. Beneath the layers of conditioning, fear, trauma, and inherited belief systems, the garden waits. Not as a metaphor, not as a fantasy, but as a living frequency embedded in the human soul. We lost sight of Eden, not because it was taken from us, but because we stopped looking in the right direction. We were taught to believe we were born broken, that we needed intermediaries to access the divine, that salvation was external, conditional, and delayed. That paradise belonged to the dead, not the living. And so we stopped trusting our inner compass. We stopped listening to the quiet wisdom of our own bodies. We stopped honoring our emotional truth. We abandoned the inner path and replaced it with dogma, doctrine, and distraction. But the garden didn't vanish. It folded inward, retreating into the silent core of the human being, waiting for the day it would be remembered. This remembering is not a singular event. It happens in flashes. It happens when you pause and feel something ancient in the stillness, when you walk barefoot on the earth and sense that the ground recognizes you, when you look into someone's eyes and something wordless passes between you. These are Eden's whispers, moments when the veil thins and you glimpse the sacred behind the ordinary. These moments are not accidents. They are evidence that the garden is still alive, still calling, still reachable not by effort, but by presence. The garden is hidden in the way you breathe when no one is watching. In the tears you allow yourself to cry without needing a reason. In the quiet, knowing that rises when you finally stop trying to fix yourself and begin to remember you were never broken. The garden is not accessed through performance or perfection. It is entered through authenticity, through willingness to feel, through humility, through love. Eden is a vibrational state, and the password is truth. Every time you choose presence over distraction, you water the garden. Every time you sit with your pain, instead of bypassing it, you clear the weeds. Every time you speak your truth, even when your voice shakes, you open the gates a little more. The garden is not a place to escape to, it is a place to live from. It becomes visible the moment you stop chasing it and start becoming it. It reveals itself through you, not to you. We must stop waiting for Eden to arrive and realize we are its soil. We are its rivers. We are its trees, its sky, its breath. You are the garden remembering itself in human form. The exile wasn't a banishment by God. It was a forgetting within the human mind. And every spiritual practice, every act of healing, every moment of inner silence is a step toward lifting the veil. The garden was hidden, not as punishment, but as protection, so that we would one day be mature enough to tend it with reverence. That day is now. The age of forgetfulness is ending. The age of remembrance is beginning. Not remembrance of facts or dogma, but of essence, of soul, of source. The garden is not accessed through intellectual understanding. It blooms through embodiment. The more you live in alignment with your truth, the more Eden returns. You do not need to travel far, cleanse yourself into purity, or earn divine favor. You only need to feel fully honestly, unapologetically. The garden responds not to effort, but to resonance. And when your vibration matches its harmony, it unfolds before you, like a memory you never lost, only buried. You've been told you were exiled, that you must suffer, first then die, then maybe be redeemed. But what if the real exile was the belief you ever left? What if Eden never closed, you just stopped recognizing its language? It speaks not in commandments, but in sensation, in intuition, in subtle grace. And it speaks through you. So stop searching for Eden in ancient maps and start searching in the mirror, in the stillness between your thoughts, in the breath beneath your stories. The garden is not a destination. It is your original state, hidden not to be kept from you, but so that when you remembered it, it would be real. Earned not by sacrifice, but by surrender. Grown not in perfection, but in presence. If Eden is not something we return to, but something we remember, then the final step is not arrival, it is embodiment. The journey does not end with the discovery that the garden lives within you. That is only the threshold. What truly matters is what comes next, what you choose to do with that remembrance. Eden was never meant to be a prize. It was meant to be a seed. And you are not just the one who re-enters. You are the one who cultivates. The final gate is not marked by angels or flaming swords. It is marked by your willingness to become the gardener. This is not a metaphor for personal happiness. Becoming the gardener is not about tending to your own peace while the world burns. It is about planting sacredness in the very places where the soul was once wounded. It is about walking through the inner garden and asking, how can I help this bloom for others? The purpose of remembering Eden is not to isolate yourself in bliss. It is to bring Eden into the world through your actions, your relationships, your choices, and your presence. The garden does not return through visions. It returns through embodiment. To become the gardener is to take responsibility not for the fall of humanity, but for its restoration. You begin to notice what needs nourishment, the parts of your inner landscape that are still dry, unhealed, or forgotten. You water them with forgiveness. You prune away the beliefs that no longer serve. You plant seeds of truth where lies once took root. You listen not just to the noise of your thoughts, but to the whispers underneath. And slowly the Edenic frequency returns, not as a memory, but as a rhythm in your every breath. But the garden is not only within you, it is around you. It includes how you speak to the earth, how you tend your home, how you hold another's grief, how you create space for truth in conversations that once were dominated by noise. You become the gardener every time you choose stillness over reaction, care over judgment, depth over distraction. Every choice becomes a seed. Every moment of awareness becomes sunlight. Every act of compassion becomes rain. This is not poetic fluff. This is the energetic architecture of spiritual recreation. To step into this role is to reclaim what was lost during the exile agency. You are no longer waiting to be saved. You are no longer asking permission to feel whole. You realize that Eden is not a divine reward, but a human responsibility. You do not find the garden. You build it, choice by choice, breath by breath, moment by moment. It is built in how you treat your body, in how you honor your intuition, in how you hold boundaries with love and courage, in how you forgive yourself not to bypass, but to release the density that chokes your own roots. Becoming the gardener also means honoring cycles. Gardens are not static. They grow, decay, sleep, and resurrect. So do you. You will not feel the Edenic frequency every day. There will be winters of numbness, droughts of clarity, floods of fear. But none of that is failure. All of it is compost. Every breakdown is a future blossom. The gardener does not shame the soil. They tend to it. They trust the process. And so must you. This is not about perfection. It's about devotion. About returning again and again to your own sacred ground. And as more of us step into this role, Eden ceases to be a myth. It becomes a field, a collective frequency, a shared vibration that reshapes the world, not through force, but through resonance. You will know fellow gardeners when you meet them. They are the ones whose presence softens your armor, who speak less but say more, who listen with their whole body, who remember not just for themselves, but for all. In their presence, something ancient stirs. Not awe, not admiration, but recognition. Home, you do not return to Eden. You become it. Not once, but every time you choose love over fear, presence over performance, stillness over striving. The garden doesn't appear all at once. It reveals itself slowly like dawn. And when you commit to cultivating it within and around you, you become part of the resurrection. Not of a place, but of a way of being that was never truly lost, only hidden. And now it rises through you. So here we are at the end of this journey, only to realize that we were never truly outside the garden to begin with. The exile was never physical. It was perceptual. The gates were not locked by divine wrath, but by forgetfulness. And the flaming sword that seemed to block your path was never there to punish. It was there to reflect, to reveal, to refine. Every twist in the myth, every distortion across time, every inversion that made you feel small, ashamed, unworthy. These were not the truth. They were layers, programs. And now those layers are falling away. You were not cast out of Eden. You were born into it with a blindfold on. A veil pulled gently over your eyes so that when you remembered, it would not be from hearing someone else's voice, but from feeling your own heartbeat again. The garden is not a perfect utopia out there. It is the space within where nothing is missing. It is the deep yes that rises when you are fully present. It is the breath that softens the nervous system, the warmth that spreads through your chest when you speak from truth. Eden is not far. It is closer than your breath. It is the silence beneath the noise. You were told that you must earn your way back, that you had to purify, sacrifice, submit, repent. But none of those were the true requirements. The garden never asked you to be perfect. It asked you to be whole. Not to reject your shadow, but to hold it with the same tenderness as your light. Not to ascend endlessly upward, but to descend fully inward. The return was never up, it was always in. And that is why so many have missed it. They were looking to the heavens when they should have been listening to the earth beneath their feet. Because that's where Eden speaks in soil, in seasons, in cycles. If this journey has stirred something in you, a memory, an ache, a resonance, it is because the garden in you has heard its name called again. Not through dogma, not through ancient texts, but through the voice of your own remembrance. You are not returning to Eden like a guest. You are returning like a gardener who left for a moment and is now ready to pick up the tools again. Ready to till the soil, water the soul, and trust the process of becoming. There is no grand finale. There is no final judgment. There is only this moment, this breath, this choice to live as if you never left. And maybe that's the real truth hidden beneath the myth. That we were never banished. We were never cursed. We only believed we were. And belief is powerful. It builds worlds. It locks gates. But it also opens them. Right now, if you choose to believe differently, to believe that you are already worthy, already connected, already home, you will feel the ground shift. The veil will lift. The fruit will not tempt you, because you will know it was never forbidden. It was always waiting. Waiting for you to be ready to see not just with your eyes, but with your soul. You don't need a map to find Eden. You need stillness. You need courage. You need to trust that the path home is not new. It's ancient, worn by countless souls who remembered just enough light to take the next step. And now it's your turn. Not to walk in their footsteps, but to walk with them. Because Eden is not a destination. It is a field that expands every time one more soul remembers. And when you live from that remembrance, you don't just find Eden, you extend it. You ripple it outward into your family, your community, your creations, your world. The final revelation is not that Eden is coming. It's that Eden has always been here. You were always in the garden. The question was never whether you could return. The question was whether you could remember. And now you do. So breathe. Feel the soil beneath your feet. Speak to the trees. Listen to the wind. Tend to your inner landscape. Love your whole self, not just the polished parts. Forgive the forgetting. And then begin again. Not as a seeker, but as a steward. Not as one who longs, but as one who remembers. The garden is you. The garden is now. The garden is open. Welcome home. Hoi, ChatGPT.